Приветствие предоставляется президенту Международной федерации философских обществ профессору МакБрайду.
Honorable Deputy Chairman of the Council of Federation of the Federal Assembly, honorable representatives, representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and of the Russian Commission for UNESCO, honorable officials of the Russian Academy of Sciences, honorable officials of UNESCO, starting with Deputy Director Pierre Senet, and honorable ambassadors and other dignitaries and colleagues, or as Professor Husseinov told me I should say simply at the beginning, philosophers all, philosophers of the world. On behalf of the Steering Committee of the International Federation of Philosophical Societies, FISP as it is known, and of our more than 100 national and international member societies, I wish above all to thank and to congratulate the sponsors and organizers of this most auspicious occasion for world philosophy, the Conference on Philosophy in the Dialogue of Cultures that we are now inaugurating as the celebration of World Philosophy Day here in Russia. It is clear that this conference has strong support not only from UNESCO, which instituted the celebration of World Philosophy Day a little less than a decade ago, as several have already mentioned, but also from the highest echelons of government of the Russian Federation. This is extremely gratifying to all of us. It also reminds us of the great tradition of Russian philosophy and philosophers. That tradition, of course, includes many famous personalities, some of whom, alas, spent much of their lives away from their motherland, others of whom made their contributions to philosophy and in general to the life of the mind, while remaining here through often troubled times. Names that immediately come to mind for someone most familiar with the traditions of Western European philosophy like myself include Shestov, Bakhtin, and Berdyaev, for example, but we should not forget the enormous diversity of Russian philosophical thought that runs from the Slavophiles to philosophers of law such as Pashukanis, to the visionary scientist Vernadsky, and that also includes philosophically inspired novelists such as the great names of Tolstoy, whom Deputy Director Senet just quoted, and Dostoevsky. To involve such a wide range of philosophers with such often opposed points of view in dialogue is a daunting but exciting task. To employ them in a dialogue of cultures reaching beyond the borders of Russia to the whole world is even more exciting and, I think, most worthwhile. And it is one of the principal objectives of this conference. My own past visits to Russia have always been connected in some way with philosophy. The first was a post-Congress excursion organized by the hosts of the World Congress of Philosophy in Vienna in 1968. Much later, in 1993, there was the World Congress of Philosophy here in Moscow, which a number of the colleagues who are present in this room helped to bring to fruition, despite the great difficulties occasioned by the transition that was then taking place. These memories are dear to my heart, especially because, as many of you no doubt know, supporting and sponsoring the quinquennial World Congresses is the chief responsibility of FISP itself, International Federation of Philosophical Societies. But in terms of our conference theme today, one episode from one of my other visits to Russia stands out particularly in my mind. It dates from 1985. I was leading a delegation of philosophers, mostly American, a few from Africa and Europe, and one of our stops was precisely at the Institute of Philosophy here in Moscow, which I want to congratulate again on the occasion of its 80th anniversary. The director then, as for many years thereafter, was Professor Stepin. And in his speech to us, he emphasized above all the commitment of the Institute at the center of Russian philosophy to maintaining dialogue with philosophers throughout the world, even during the times when the pressures within Russian society were most inward-looking, most unwelcoming to points of view other than the officially dominant one of the time. As over the years I have become much better acquainted with some Russian colleagues who experienced these pressures, such as our former FISP steering committee, Professor Lektorsky, our own first vice president of FISP, Professor Marietta Stepanyans, and Professor Husseinov, as well as so many others, I have come more fully to appreciate the truth of what Professor Stepan said that day, generalized from the Institute of Philosophy itself to the broader, indeed now vast, Russian philosophical community. In that community there is, and there has always been, a love of ideas that no appeal to dogmatism has ever been able entirely to suppress. I am very happy that one of the ancestors, so to speak, of this spirit, Vladimir Soloviev, will be honored at a special ceremony at the Institute on Wednesday. Finally, while, as I have said, we are extremely gratified that these events are taking place here in Moscow this week, we are also aware that along with this gratification must go a sense of obligation, of responsibility. Philosophy, if it is to be worthy of the kind of special attention that it is receiving here, must continue to make contributions to the world at large, increasingly so in this global era. The cultivation of the life of the mind, the life of the spirit, is extremely important and in no way to be despised. But in order to be vital and genuine, it must at the same time be accompanied by a commitment to social justice, a point that the Christian mystic Soloviev, like so many of his fellow Russian philosophers before and since, have also stressed. And it must be accompanied by an active dialogue among thinkers of the most diverse intellectual outlooks, as well as with the world community as a whole, the community of mankind, which, as Soloviev also insisted, is ultimately one.